I'm happy to be here with you this year. I think this is the fourth or fifth year that I have taken the blessing of this Apologetics and Evangelism Conference. We will have an intro conversation or discussion. And when I say discussion, I mean an interactive, engaging discussion on worldviews. The theme of the conference is worldviews. So we need to know what worldviews are, the function of worldviews, the importance, significance, how to evaluate worldviews, what are the questions, and so on and so forth. So a general idea of the concept or the phenomena of worldviews. Then we will talk about one of the worldviews that has been very prevalent in our society, called the new atheism. Any of you heard of the new atheism? Not just atheism. There's a new brand of atheism that had emerged, and we will discuss that, God willing. And then the third kind of linear thinking of these discussions will be the Christian worldview from a philosophical perspective. What is the Christian worldview? So we'll begin with worldviews. Any of you heard of this term, worldview, before? Well, the concept of worldviews received a lot of attention recently. Back in 20, 30 years ago, you would discuss religions. You would ask people, what is your religion? Of course, it's not very politically correct to ask, but you ask religions. You're either a Christian, a Muslim, or an atheist. So you have main categories of religions. Nowadays, the concept of religion is gone. The concept of worldviews has replaced it. So worldviews basically is, I call it the cafeteria approach. I can take a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and a little bit of that, and then make up my own philosophy of life, my own worldview. Because when I say religion, I limit myself to just 5 or 6 main categories of religion. So worldviews now is the up and coming trend. When you're if you're watching in the movie theaters, part of the you see the cast of the movie theater, you see the rating and all that, and then there's a category of worldview. So this movie, it reflects that worldview. It's actually now has become very very common. Let me give you the textbook definition of what worldviews are. The Universe Next Door is kind of the classic book that discusses all the various worldviews that exist. James Sire says the worldview is a set of beliefs and presuppositions which we hold about the basic makeup of our world that ultimately guide and direct our behavior. David Nobel, he said in his book Understanding the Times, another definition, and any ideology, philosophy, theology, movement, or religion that provides an overarching approach to understanding God and the world. Each single one of us has a worldview. Now the question is it the true worldview, or is it the worldview that aligns with reality and truth, or is it not? That's the question. Every single one of us has a worldview. It provides a correct prescription. It's like eyeglasses. When you're having eyeglasses or contacts, you're putting some kind of a device before your eyes for you to be able to see the world and make sense out of the worlds and the events in this world. It's a roadmap of life. Every single one of us has a roadmap of life. Now, where do they come from? They come from various sources. They come from church, from the media, from school, from friends, from parenting, from family, and so on and so forth. Worldviews also determine our decisions, our goals, what we think will make us happy, how we spend our money, how we relate to others, how we treat others. So worldviews are indispensable to our lives. We live by our worldviews. I want you to stop and think sometimes, think with yourself and ask yourself this question: what is my worldview? What is it that is shaping my thinking, my thought process? How do I know what I know? How do I know what I know? A question that I wanted to kind of get out of the way before we delve into the common worldviews we have is, why bother? Why do we need to talk about worldviews? Why do we need to talk about what we know or what we hold as our philosophy of life? Why? Any of you heard of this saying? Ideas have consequences. There's a famous book called Ideas Have Consequences. What you know affects what you do. True or false? True, right? So it's important for us to know the truth so that we can do the right thing. What are the three faculties that make up our being, or what are we made up of? Besides body, spirit, and soul, what is our entity as a human individual? What are we made up of? Three things. One of them is our mind. I'm giving you some, clues here. What are the other two? What is that? Emotions? Perfect. Emotions, but before emotions, will and heart. So we are made up of three distinct yet related faculties. Our mind, our will, and our heart. True or false? Right? You can call them 3 H's if you want to make it easy for you to remember. Head, hand, and heart. These are our thoughts that feed our mind. These are our actions that we actually do, okay? And this is our when I say heart could mean a lot of things in the scriptures, but in this context, I refer to heart as the seat of sentiments and emotions and feelings, okay? So we are made up of mind, will, and heart. Any of you heard of the three transcendentals? It's a big name, but if you've studied philosophy, all the philosophers across the ages, and the scholars and the thinkers and the seekers of the truth have always struggled with three ideals. They call them the three transcendentals. And if you go to Google and type truth, goodness, and beauty, you will see that these three are pillars of philosophical thought. Truth, goodness, and beauty. What is truth? What is goodness? And what is beauty? Truth is nourishment, or resides where? In our mind. We ought to feed our mind with that which is true. Correct? Truth is the nourishment of our mind. Goodness resides where? In our will. When we know that which is true, we will do that which is good. And then the byproduct of these two is what? Beauty. Beauty, sometimes some scholars refer to beauty as joy. So you can say beauty or joy, which is the ultimate quest for our that we as human yearn for. So when we know that which is true, we will do that which is good, and the byproduct is that we will feel that which is beautiful and joyful and fulfilling. Do you see the progression here? Let me take it a little bit more. Let me see if there are any bases of this in the scriptures.
In the scripture in Genesis differentiated between the image and the likeness. I don't know if you're going to mention this in... Okay. In Genesis, created man, he said, let's create man in our image after our likeness. Then the following verse, God created man in his image, and no mention about likeness. That's why church fathers start to say, is there any difference between image and likeness? So they said, the image, we received it from God as a gift. And actually, even with sin, we don't lose our image. But likeness, actually, we acquired by the grace of God and by our striving in order to change from glory to glory to the likeness of God, to be in the likeness of His Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. So they said the image are composed of three things. And these three things, we don't lose them with fall. But what we lose with sin or with fall is our likeness. And these three things, actually, I connected them with these three transcendence. Number one, actually, is our intellect. Number two is our free will. And number three is our immortality. The only being that was created with free will, intellect, and immortality is the human being. And because we know we are immortal, we know this by our mind, so with our will, we choose to do what's right in order to live eternally with the Lord Jesus Christ. So I can connect the intellect, of course, with the mind, the truth, the free will with our will, and choose what is good, and the immortality to live eternally with God. That's our heart and our beauty. So these three elements actually are in the scripture about our image. And having these three elements in us, this actually will help us to grow in the likeness of God, to end up in the likeness of His Son, our Lord Jesus Christ.
We can summarize by this. Our thoughts, actions, and feelings, what we know in our mind, will influence what we willfully do with our will, okay? And what we do will influence how we feel in our heart. And this is a formula that I think it's very important for us to understand. And again, I'm going to go back to worldviews in a second, but like I said, I'm going to take a tangent and discuss the importance of knowing the truth in our mind and how that drives our entire being, what we do and how we feel. It drives our entire being. That's what I'm trying to put some significance on worldviews, what we know, the truth, our intellect, our mind, and so on and so forth. Let me go over some verses from the scriptures. John 13:17. If you know these things, blessed or happy are you if you do them. Now, do you see the three? If you know these things, this is Christ speaking. If you know these things with your mind, then what's going to happen to you? You will be blessed. You will be happy if you do them. Do you see the mind and the will and the heart in this verse? Pretty straightforward. You want to be happy? You want to be blessed? Well, then do. Do what? Do the things that I have been telling you. Know them. Okay? One more verse. John 15:11. These things, the truth. When I say these things, Christ is speaking the truth. These things I have spoken to you to know them, that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Do you see all three in this verse? There is the what? The will, and there is the heart, and there is the intellect or mind. Do you see several verses? And if you study the scriptures, you'll come up with at least a dozen verses. I'll give you a couple more just to illustrate the idea. 1 Peter 1:8. Jesus Christ, whom you have not seen, yet you what? You love. Okay? Though now you do not see him, yet believing, you what? Rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory. Do you see all three in here? Do you see the will is to love after you believe intellectually who he is? And then when you believe intellectually the truth, you know the truth, and you do the commandments of Christ, then you will ultimately what? Experience what in your heart? Rejoicing inexpressible and full of glory. So there are several verses that will tell you, will illustrate that which I know is extremely important. A lot of us suffer sometimes from what we desire most, which is this, joy. Joy, which is the, in Greek philosophy, it's called eudaimonia, which is the state of being blessed or or feeling that utter joy in our heart. We want that, we yearn for that. But many times we fall or we fail to understand that if I want to feel joy, I don't necessarily have to call a psychologist or a psychotherapist and get some advice from him or her. I just simply need to do the right thing. I need to do that which is good, that which is right. But how do I do that which is good, that which is right, if I don't know that which is true? Do you see now? So feed your mind with that which is true. You will do that which is good and right. You will feel in your heart the beauty, the joy, the immortality, as His Grace mentioned. You see? So I must know the truth in my mind to do that which is right with my will in order to feel that which is pleasant. Now let's take it a step further. God, we believe in a personal God, don't we? Right? A person implies what? Those three entities existing in him or her. Right? Do you think God has a mind, will, and heart? Of course. Now, how does that fit into God's will, mind, and heart? Or mind, will, and heart? His words reveal his mind, and his laws reveal his will for us. His promises reveal his heart. And this is how God reveals himself to us. His promises, his laws, commandments, and his word, the scriptures. This is speaking, his mind is speaking to us. His will is speaking to us through his commandments or his laws. And his heart is speaking through his promises. Now, we are also created in God's image. So how does that translate into our existence, our being, in our life? These aspects fulfill the needs of the three parts of the human soul. What are those three parts? His words fulfill the mind's search for what? The truth. I, as a human being created in the image of God, as I mentioned, I yearn and desire so desperately to have the truth. Remember the three transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty? I think this should be probably a homework that you can do for next time we meet. Just simply type online, search truth, goodness, and beauty, and see how many church fathers have spoken and philosophers have spoken on these three transcendentals. They're called transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. We seek the truth, his words, which is the revelation of God's mind, fulfills our search for truth. His laws, which is the revelation of God's will, fulfill our search for goodness. His promises, which is the revelation of God's heart, fulfill our search for joy/beauty. Do you see how important for us to have that? Because that will in turn drive this, and that in turn will drive that in our heart. And this is what we so desperately need. We don't need to visit as much psychologists or therapists if we understand this formula. We simply need to do that which is good. And for us to do that which is good, we have to know and believe that which is true. Okay. Back to the point that ideas have consequences. Viktor Frankl, if any of you know who he is a neurologist, Austrian neurologist. He's a Holocaust survivor. He said something I thought was very beautiful that speaks to the fact that ideas have consequences. He said this: I am absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz were ultimately prepared not in some ministry or other in Berlin, but rather at the desks and in lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers. In other words, all the Holocaust, basically, it materialized from what? From the lecture halls and the desks of the academic philosophers and teachers. Ideas have consequences. Ideas and thoughts and belief systems have or materialize or exemplify themselves in consequences. So let's go back to our worldview discussion. What are the worldview questions that every single religion, I'm going to say the word religion, every single worldview or religion that we have in this world must answer? What are those questions? Any of you want to take a guess? How we exist, how we were created, exactly, or not created is an assumption. How do we exist is better. Yeah. What else? What's our purpose in life? Perfect. Okay, sorry, go ahead. Rewards. In other words, rewards and eternity. Very good, which is, I think you mentioned, afterlife. See, think about them as present, past, and future. Present and past, how did I get here? Who made me? Am I a product of some bacteria or some, whatever that is? Or am I created? Did I just evolve? How did I get here? Past. Present, why am I here? Purpose and meaning. I think you mentioned that, right? Meaning of life, right? Why am I here? And then future, where am I going? Where did I come from? Past. Why am I here? Present. Where am I going? Future. These are the three, I call them the three existential questions of life. Now, these questions, we can maybe expand on them. Does God exist? Is he personal? If so, what are his attributes? Where did the universe come from? What is the nature of man? Why do humans suffer? How do we determine what's right and what's wrong? And then, is there life after death? So you see metaphysical questions, theological question, ethical questions, anthropological questions, you see, and eschatological questions, and so on and so forth. All of these questions stem from where did I come from, why am I here, and where am I going? Every worldview must have an answer for these questions. And their last one is, what is the meaning of life? Now, what are common worldviews that we have? You tell me, share with me some common worldviews that you have encountered or know of. I'll start. Atheism. What else? A lot of isms. Evolution. Okay, very good. What else? My worldview is that I believe in the evolution theory. My worldview is that I'm an atheist. What else? Judaism. Yeah. Judaism is more of a, you can say, I'm looking at worldviews, not so much categories, big, huge buckets of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Because those three, I can say that they're all theistic religions. Theism. See? So what else? Naturalism. This is the big one. Naturalism. Okay? Or scientific naturalism, to be specific. What else? Yes, right on. Hedonism. Do you know what? Anybody knows what hedonism is? Pursuit of pleasure. Say it. I said love of pleasure. Hedonism. Any other isms? Agnosticism. Very, very common. It's actually, I think I mentioned to you last two conferences back, is that Gnosticism now has been it has almost replaced atheism. I go and talk to several atheists around the country. And I see less and less atheists and more agnostics. As I mentioned, it has become more fashionable to say I'm an agnostic. I'm not an atheist. And we'll see, you know what the difference is? Like atheism basically says no God. A is the opposite of, or lack of, or no. Theism means God from theos. What's agnosticism? Don't know. Gnosis means to know in Greek, gnosis. That's why we have the G, which we carried it with the K, which we don't pronounce, K-N-O-W, kno. We say no because it's gno, okay, in Greek. So when you say egno, means I don't know. I don't know. Truth about reality is unknowable. That's what agnosticism is. Besides agnosticism, naturalism, I said another one here. Humanism, hedonism. Existentialism says what? Essence or existence? Which one precedes the other? Existence precedes essence, which is completely diametrically opposing to Christian theism. All of those are worldviews that we as Christians must be made aware of these philosophies. We must, because there are folks out there that we live with that ascribe to these philosophies. So these, all of these common worldviews can be categorized in three main categories. The first is theism. God made everything. Okay? And then atheism. Under that, you get the secular humanists, the naturalists, and the evolutionists, and all of these. No God at all. And then you get the pantheistic worldview, which includes the Eastern mystics and the Eastern philosophies, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on and so forth, which says God is all. These are the three main buckets and categories of worldviews. From these three, you get branches of hundreds of worldviews. I'm going to leave this for a second. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Theism, atheism, and pantheism. And these are the criteria or the subjects that I wanted to display each of these categories with. So when it comes to the body and soul, theism says we're united. We are creatures of body and soul. Atheism says, no, we're not. We are only body because we are a product of this universe. Naturalism says nature is all there is. There's nothing metaphysical. There's nothing supernatural. And then pantheism says, no, there's nothing material. Everything is immaterial. How can I evaluate all these competing worldviews that really are competing for market share? There are some invalid criteria and there are some valid ones, and we'll close with the valid ones. Which ones we should not follow as criteria for truth or for discerning the true worldview. Some may say, well, it's instinctive. It seems right to me. I have a gut feeling that Buddhism is right. Then you have a gut feeling that you're also wrong. Feelings. It feels good to be an atheist. It feels good because I have some emotions that are tied to this specific worldviews. Customs and traditions, culture is influencing me. Popularity, it's true because a lot of these, the majority practices these worldviews. Pragmatism, it's true because it works. Now let's look at the, of course, these are invalid criteria for truth. 2 tests for truth. The first test is the criteria that helps align my belief with reality to test truth. First would be coherence or logical consistency. The worldview that claims to be true, or the true worldview, must be logically consistent and logically coherent. What I mean by that is, does it have any contradictory claims within itself? Let's look at naturalism. Naturalism says what? Matter is all there is. We are a product, we are a piece of furniture in this universe. When we die, we will be absorbed back into this universe. That's what naturalism is all about. The spiritual realm is non-existent on the naturalistic worldview. Thoughts are what? Created by some motions of atoms and molecules in my brain. Now, let's see the inconsistency in this worldview, but I will let C.S. Lewis describe it because he does it much more eloquently than I do. He says this in his book, Miracles, page 18. He says, if my mental processes are determined wholly by the motion of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true. And hence, I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms. Let me share with you something else he said in his book, The Weight of Glory. If minds are wholly dependent on brains, and that's what naturalism says. We don't have minds, we have brains as an organ, brain. Okay? And brains on biochemistry, and biochemistry on the meaningless flux of atoms, then I cannot understand how the thought of those minds should have any more significance than the sound of the wind in the trees. What makes your misfiring? What makes your motion of atoms better than my motion of atoms? Do you see? Then the naturalist must be appealing to what? A higher power, not just the atoms and the molecules motions in his brain or her brain. Do you see? He is putting forth a truth claim which transcends the naturalist or the naturalistic perspective. If he's adhering to, or if he's putting forth a truth claim, he must appeal to something supernatural beyond naturalism. So thus naturalism fails the test of coherence. Let's look at atheism. A couple of examples. The answers to where you are going depends on your answer to where you came from. True or false? It should depend on where you came from, because where you came from will determine where you're going. Actually, will also determine why you're here. So this is the most important answer, is where you came from. The answer to why you're here depends on your answers to where you came from and where you're going, and so on and so forth. In other words, your origin and your meaning and your destiny, your past, your present, and your future are interdependent. I cannot say that I am a product of this natural world and I will go to heaven when I die. Doesn't work this way. Or I am a product, or I am created in the image and likeness of God, and then when I die, I will cease to exist. It doesn't work this way. That's what incoherence in this thinking or in this thought. Do you see what I'm saying? So they must cohere and work together and become logically consistent. So this is what atheism says. Ask an atheist about origin. Where did you come from? He will say, well, he or she will say, random mutations and accident of nature. Where are you going? Well, my body will fuel the organisms that come after me, because they believe in biological evolutionary theory. What's the purpose and meaning of your life? Why are you here? I have to live. My purpose is to live as a good citizen, as much good as possible. See inconsistency in these three answers. Question 1 and 2, they're consistent. I see the coherence in these two. But question 3 doesn't follow logically from 1 and 2. In other words, why are you then inserting an ideal of good and bad, right and wrong? Why do you insert a moral ideal in this question when you are a product of nature and you're going to fuel the next one coming? Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, the question here is why? Why do I have to be a good citizen? Why do I have to live a good moral life? Yes?
I just want to share a story, just a brief comment. I was in a discussion with an atheist once about this point, and I was kind of asking him and trying to push him, not as eloquently as George kind of demonstrated, but really what's the ultimate purpose of atheism. And I brought up the Holocaust because, worldviews tend to be tested really well in extreme situations. If you can, withstand extreme examples, then you have a consistent worldview. I brought up the Holocaust. We kept talking about it was more evolution, naturalism, etc., and morality. And really, brought up Hitler's actions, and he ended up saying, well, as a naturalist, evolution eventually selected him out anyway. But then I asked him, well, don't you understand that you had to concede, you're kind of conceding, for evolution to do that, millions had to die. So this is not really, as a purpose, this is not really the ultimate purpose. And, his worldview kind of really fell, and he didn't really have an answer for that. So it's just a comment on your purpose.
The second criteria is correspondence. So the first was coherence, logical consistency. The second criteria is correspondence, which means existential relevance. What I mean by that is this. The worldview must account for the world around us. It must be relevant. When I say existential relevance, it must be relevant to my deepest needs in life, and it must address my deepest questions in life. It must be fulfilling to me existentially. Does it answer my existential questions, where I came from, why am I here, what's the purpose of life, what's the meaning of life? All of these existentially relevant tests, this worldview, or the worldview that claims to be true, must answer these questions. Let me give you some examples. Naturalism says matter and energy are all there is. However, we know that life includes other things, such as relationships, commitments, love, jealousy, hate, all of these things. But wait a minute, naturalism doesn't have any room for these things, because justice and love is not made up of molecules or atoms, right? Justice is not made up of molecules, but we know existentially by our lives that we experience these things. But naturalism, when it comes to these things, is silent. What does that mean? It lacks correspondence to reality. We said common worldviews are 3 categories. Atheism, theism, and pantheism. From these 3 categories, you have a lot of branches of little worldviews and all the isms that we had discussed. We also said that worldview questions are the past, present, and future, where we came from, why we're here, where we're going. And then we test worldviews by two tests: the coherence test, logical consistency, and the correspondence test.